So welcome to our Beginner's Guide to Story Structure with Gillian Fritzsche. Today we're going to be talking to Gillian about story structure for film, documentary, basically all kinds of narrative stories that you may film or present to an audience. We're going to get started in just a moment, but before we do, I just wanted to give you an overview of our agenda. So our first couple of minutes are just going to be this introductions and housekeeping. I do have a short update for you about Celtx itself, and then we're going to get started with chatting to Gillian. At the end, we do have time for some questions for Gillian, and we'll be taking those from the audience. We did have some that were sent in ahead of time, so we'll be going ahead with those, and then we'll be taking the ones that you submit. When it comes to that, what we would like to ask is that if you have a question for Gillian, you use the Q&A feature. That's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It just says Q&A. You can ask a question there. It's a lot easier for us to direct them to her if you ask them there. If you just have a general comment, a general question, feel free to go ahead and use the chat. Those may not make it to Gillian, though, if you put those in there. So just for a warning on that. We also ask that in the chat you consider that, you know, we're all here in a public venue, so use your best language and be polite to one another. And if you have general questions about Celtx itself, this is not really the venue for that. We do have some Celtx support people with us here, but we won't be answering support questions. So we ask that you send those to support@celtx.com after the webinar. So who we are, I am Dara. I'm the one talking right now. I am your host today, as well as our customer training lead. And next to me up there on your screen is Nicole. Nicole is our co-host, and she's also our community manager. If you've spoken to us on social media, you have spoken to Nicole, most likely. We also have Junior and Laura. Junior and Laura are both on our Celtx support team. We all wear a lot of hats here, so they have other things that they do as well. But the main thing is that they're both on our Celtx support team, and they're going to be here helping us moderate the questions in the chat. And then, of course, the star attraction is Gillian. So I'm going to let Gillian introduce herself in just a moment, but just so you're all aware, she is a writer, director, producer. She's worked on a number of short feature films, corporate clients, theater. She's got a whole range of experience that's going to be really helpful for all of you today. Before we get started with Gillian, I just wanted to give you all a little update about Celtx itself. So a couple of things I did want to highlight for those of you who are writers. We did recently release an improved script history that gives you version naming as well as favoriting of versions. If you are a free client, then you can view your history but not restore from it. So some of those features will not be available to you. However, if you're a paid client, you will have all of them. But some great news for our free clients is that you now have access to our real-time collaboration. So you can co-write in real time, see the changes, and see who's in there with you. And you also have access to our improved commenting. So you can highlight sections of your script, leave a comment for a co-writer, tag them, etc. And coming soon for our free clients will be limited access to our index cards. So for every project you start, you will have access to 10 index cards to start your story plotting. If you need more than that, you will have to subscribe, but we wanted to make sure you got some of it out there. We also really want to direct everyone to our YouTube channel, where we have a great series called our Fundamentals series, which covers a lot of this sort of story planning information. And I am just going to close this down and show you our faces. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing. And sorry, just give me one moment. There we go. So I see a note there. For 2 years, I thought it was pronounced Celtx. It is actually pronounced Celtx. So the C stands for crew. Celtx stands for crew, equipment, location, talent, XML. So the C is hard for crew. Just a little note there, because I know lots of people ask that question all the time. So to get started, we'll just get started in with Gillian. Gillian, I did say that you would introduce yourself in just a moment. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into all of this?
Sure. I'm so excited to be here. I love talking about story structure. Probably too much sometimes. There's a lot of people that collaborate with me are like, okay, we get it. Go on. But yeah, so I started, it's one of those stories where I did drama club in 4th grade and never looked back. I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I have gone headfirst for it ever since. So yeah, I was doing community theater in high school and a theater film program for my undergrad, a business program for my master's, which I brought into working in theater shortly after that as a producer, and then moved to Los Angeles, transitioned to film, was working as a first AD and then a producer, and then I had been writing when I was younger, and so I started writing again and directing, and so transitioned from the kind of producing side and the back end of things to the writing and directing side over the last couple of years. And yeah, I think it's one of those things is you always feel like, when did it start? When did it really start? I could even look back to when I was 3 years old and I did a craft and my mother told me, "You are so creative." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll go with that." So it's always for me, it's been one of those things that was always there, and you kind of know this is what I need to be doing.
Definitely. I think a lot of our participants today will have that same sense of, I've just always known I'm creative. I know that's where kind of I came from too, my mom saying to me, like, I told a little story when I was 4 years old, and, "Oh, you should be a writer," So I think we all have had those experiences.
Yeah.
That's really great. It's interesting that you went from producing to writing and directing, because you often hear the opposite, that people started maybe in writing or acting, moved into directing, and then went to producing. But you actually went producing in the other direction. Not really direction. It's all part of one creative endeavor, but that's interesting. When it comes to your creative process of writing, creating films and videos, where does story structure fit in that process? And why is it so important?
Well, those I think are two different questions.
They are.
They are two different questions. I would say I'll start with, why is it so important first? And I mean, everyone's here because they recognize it's important. So I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but if structure is broken, the audience is going to get bored, whether it's a 2-minute video, a 5-minute video, or a 90-minute feature or doc. And they might not know why they suddenly stopped caring about this character. They might not know why they're suddenly totally confused when they were tracking. They understood, but then wait, what? Why does that relate to what? So audience might not understand what's going on, but usually that's when structure is broken. And so, when you're diagnosing a script problem, or when you're, trying to figure out why you liked that movie up until a certain point and that sort of thing, that's a structure issue. So, a lot of people who are creative just want to be like, well, I just want to write and see where it takes me, whether it's theater or film or some sort of, experimental piece. But when you look at things that work, videos that work, you're going to see structure. You're going to see a structure that works. It's not always going to be exactly the same structure. You've got over the centuries, you've got different people describing stories that work in different ways. Right. But you're going to be able to see some similarities, some parallels. And why is structure important? I have some notes. I'm going to do one more check on this. It's what makes it meaningful. It's what makes the story meaningful. So if you get bored, that's an issue, but you could have a good story that you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I watched what happened. But if your structure is not dialed in, and whether it's this type of structure or that type of structure, if it's not dialed in, you'll get to the end and you'll be like, oh, okay, That was good. I watched it. I probably won't watch it again. But the stories that have structure dialed in so that that climax, that resolution, that crisis, and then climax makes me feel like I experienced it.
Mm.
I mean, yes, there's character, yes, there's, you know, theme, there's all these other things, but if structure's broken, you're not going to feel that at the end. You're not going to have that meaningful moment. And there's a lot of reasons why, you know, like I was confused or I was bored or it just was a plot.
Mm.
There wasn't a meaning to it. So those for me are the two most important reasons. Keep your audience interested and give them an experience they want to come back for. Again, whether it's a 2-minute video, a 5-minute video, or a 90-minute feature or a doc.
Right.
So yeah, that's why it's important. But again, you guys all know that. That's why you're
I think as mothers, we both can relate to that as well. You know, like when your kid starts telling you a story and it's like all over the place. And it's like, I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say, but I have no idea what we're talking about. Or, you know,
yeah,
it
the
can be
point.
really difficult when there's no structure, despite your interest. You know, it can be very difficult to follow along when there is no structure. So when it comes to structure, um, how do you start with that? Is there a specific approach that you take where you're starting the structure before you write? Do you sometimes start writing and then bring in structure? Is there a specific formula that you would suggest to people for how to get that structure into their stories?
Yeah, I think structure is the beginning and the end.
Mm.
I love other things about film too, but man, I love structure. So I would recommend to everybody right now, set aside the writing project, set aside that script you're working on or that, you know, corporate thing you're doing, and just take a day or a week or a couple nights here and there and read about structure. Understand structure. Look at the different types of structure. You know, you've got Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. You've, of course, got Story by Robert McKee. You've got, you can look back at Aristotle, you know, great range. Dan Harmon's got a great theory that's more recent. And just look at them, read through them, see how they're similar, and familiarize yourself with what works. I mean, everyone knows basic 3-act structure. A hero has a goal and he or she comes up against an obstacle and needs to overcome it.
Mm.
And, you know, the way in which we set that up and we play it out and then we resolve it, beginning, middle, and end, every story. So, you know, we're familiar with that. But when we look at, you know, whether it's an 8-point story structure or hero's journey, which is very extensive and detailed, and yeah, all of these other ways of looking at the different beats in a story, what I would suggest that you do is do your own research. Like, this is not the right forum to say, here's this one, here's this one, here's this one. This is not a class. I want you to go look it up for yourself. And as a person who has lived on the earth, think, how have stories impacted me? What stories have impacted me? Whether it was this particular film or this particular book or this particular play. And as you look through the different structures that are out there, see which ones are more familiar to you, which ones go, oh yes, I identify with that story structure. I have felt that in this film, or I have seen that in this TV show or film for musical or something like that. So if you start to like be drawn towards, some people are drawn towards hero's journey and they like to write hero's journey all the time. Some people are drawn towards the typical Hollywood 8-point story structure. Some people have really resonated with Blake Snyder's breakdown and the Save the Cat breakdown, you know. Right. And a couple others I would love to highlight. One is mini movie method, and that's one I go to a lot. The mini movie method, and I've forgotten the other one right now. I'm sure it'll come back to me. But my point is, find the ones that you resonate with. And if it's one or two, oh, contour, that's the other one.
All right.
Really love the contour, and that's, you know, an answer for a question later in terms of tools and stuff. But Contour, the app, has a great structure kind of software, and they ask different questions of your character, of yourself as a writer, of the story and stuff. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I would encourage everyone right now to go find the ones that work for you, that you are going, yes, that one, or that, in like a couple, and like let those be your like reference docs on your desktop. And so when you're familiar with them, when you have a new idea, then we can reference them. I'll give you some practical ideas in a sec, how and when to do that. But I think that it's important to internalize those structures so that they're in there, you understand them, you know what the beats are, you could pass a test. And then when you start writing, you could throw it out. And I don't mean don't do it. I mean, don't worry about it. When you start writing, write whatever comes out first. And if it's, you've got great dialogue, write that first. If it's, oh, I've got these like sequence of events in my mind, write that first. If you've got some great character ideas and you just want to write like a little mini biography of all these characters, write that first. And then as the idea progresses, that's where you see, oh, this story is actually kind of leaning towards this one structure that I like or that I identify with. And I'm going to see where what's missing, and I'll fill in those parts. Or it's, you know, this one's more of a hero's journey one. Okay, where's my wise wizard? You know, so, start from a place of understanding the structure that resonates with you, then breathe into your stories the creative life that's inspiring you, and then see where they fit and use the structure you have to fill in. So that's my basic suggestion for beginning writers who don't know their methodology yet, who don't know what works for them. But I'll tell you, sometimes when I'm starting a project, the idea comes to me within a structure, and I write it out as an outline first. Other times I've got an idea for a scene and some characters and the journey they go on, and I just write about those characters. And then afterwards I see, okay, here's how that fits. So yes, I've gone on. You're gonna have to stop me.
No, that is perfect. As a writer myself, a lot of this is resonating with me as well, even though I talk and do this all day long with our clients. It's still good to hear these kinds of things said, because similar to you, sometimes I just have a character, you know, or a line, like just a single line, and you just start writing from that, and then you're like, okay, wait, this needs to be an actual story. Let's add some structure in here. But like you said, if you are versed in that structure already, if you know it like you know a language, like you've done your French immersion or your Spanish immersion class, you've done your structure immersion, and now you're speaking the language as you're writing, I think is how it feels to me, you know, sometimes,
I
for
think
sure.
it's important to note that you really don't have to understand all of them.
Right.
You don't have to know all. There's this one that diagram that's going around on Twitter that kind of takes like a dozen different story structures and puts them all together, and there's like a diamond and some circles and ovals, and you know, a lot of the screenwriters are looking at that on Twitter going, ha ha ha. And you know, most of us just kind of scroll past it because it's just too much. You don't need to understand every single one.
No.
Just find the ones that work for you and work from them.
Yep, that makes absolute sense. So I know that you've worked in theater, you've done shorts, you've done features, you've done documentaries. If you were going to speak to the major structural differences between those, are there any? And if so, what are they? Those four genres. You can narrow it down to two if you prefer, documentary and film, or something like that.
Yeah. I think, you know, at a top level sort of idea, the difference between a feature and a short, it's generally going to be your feature's got the A story, it's got the B story, it's got the C story, it may even have a D story if you're getting real complicated. A short's probably just going to have that A story. You don't have time for all the rest. So there's a simple, like, upper level basic difference between features and shorts. between features and docs, it's an interesting question, because you generally have your hero. You generally have those obstacles. You generally have a goal.
Yeah.
Even with a topical documentary, and remind me, I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But how that plays out is just a matter of timing. With a script, with whether you're writing it, you're directing it, you're producing it, it's all there. It's all there. You can determine what you're doing ahead of time, make it fit what you need it to fit, fill in the gaps where you see some gaps, sew it up, make sure you're not going off on any bunny trails that are going to bore the audience or that you haven't earned as a storyteller. But with a doc, sometimes you don't even know what the story is until you've shot it.
Right.
And so, the project I did recently, before we shot, we thought, we made up a plan of, here's the structure we will be going for. Here's the structure we're going to try to shoot. We have a plan. We have a goal. We're going to try to ask these questions to get this story out of our subjects, make the plan to shoot this B-roll so that we can tell that story visually and not just talking heads. But what we found, generally we had that hero, they have a goal, and here was the very obvious obstacle. But what we found was that the minutiae, the details, tended to be a little bit different afterwards, and that's okay. That's doc. So where we went in with, these are our 5 or 7 points we're going to touch on in our story structure. What we found, in the interview and in the shooting process, was that some of those didn't land emotionally, perhaps by the question, the answers they gave, or we simply weren't able to get effective B-roll shots to tell that part of the story effectively, and so you have to sidestep that, whether it's a feature or a doc. So. But even with a narrative process, one of my professors used to say, the story is written 3 times. You've probably heard this a lot. It's written first as a script, it's written by the director, and then it's written by the editor. Or the director who's directing the editor, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so doc is very similar. It's written when you go out to shoot. It's written while you're shooting. It's written when you cut.
Right.
And so every time you take a pass on a story, you're looking at how does this fit? What structure am I looking at here? And if you know what you're using, if you know which framework, which skeleton you're fitting the story into, then you can see where the gaps are. You can see what's missing in terms of grabbing the audience and pulling them to the end, So yeah, there's some differences, but a story is a story when it comes to the feature, I think.
Right.
The doc and narrative.
Yeah.
And I remembered to tell you, so I'm working on a topical doc.
Right.
And you think, okay, well, this one doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and end. It's not something I followed this guy on his journey for 3 years, and I know exactly when he started and when he got the call and when he decided to go on his journey and when he finished the project and everything's great. It wasn't that. It's topical. It's a question. And so if any of you out there are documentarians, here's how I approach this. Mini movie method. This is the structure I go with for this documentary. I asked a question. A mini movie method, whether it's narrative or doc, it's asking a question of the hero. What is the hero's question? What is the question the hero is trying to ask or answer? And the mini movie method talks about, I'm saying it way too much, I know. Is the answer to this question yes, or is the answer to this question no? And so you go through the movie going, yes, they're going to reach their goal. Oh, nope, they're not. Oh, yes, they're having a success. Oh, nope, they're not. You can see that a lot in Lord of the Rings. Yes. And then you get to the climax. That's the big yes and a big no, and Dark Night of the Soul. Thank you, Blake Snyder. So see how, so with a topical documentary, you ask the question, bring it up front, and and then as you are bringing in people who are talking about it, people who have some things to share about this topic, each one of these resources will be able to answer your question in a positive or a negative. And you see a lot of times the documentarian will go on a road trip to seek answers, and a lot of times we kind of roll our eyes at that, and I think the reason is because a road trip and actually going in the car isn't related to the thing that pulls us, and the thing that pulls us is the question. How does this topic matter to me? What am I going to learn from this? Why is it important? There's a doc out there about GMO foods. Are they going to kill us? And is vegan eating the way you need to go? Like this, all of these things, these topical docs, it's about answering that question. No, it's going to be fine. Yes, you might die from it. That sort of thing. And so, but that's a story. That's a story. And it's not so much about, I got in my car and I drove to New Hampshire. It's what am I experiencing as an audience member being carried along in the journey of answering this question.
I like that approach. That actually helps me as well. No, it's great because, like you said, you do see a lot of these documentaries where the documentarian goes off on this journey, and it's like they're trying to almost replicate the hero's journey or something like that. They're like, I've got to have a journey, so here I go. But flipping it around so it centers on the question is a really great way to approach that kind of story, I think. Definitely. And again, it's relating to my own background as a writer as well. I can see, like, when I write an article for someone, it's a story that's told with that question at the forefront. We don't have a ton more time considering how many questions have come in. So I'm just going to ask you one more myself. And then we're going to go to the audience questions, I think, because we have a lot of them, and I want them to be able to get as much from this as possible. I know you have already recommended a few books, and for those that are asking, when we send out the recording of the webinar, that will be on a page with other resources listed as well, and we will make sure to list all of the resources that Gillian has mentioned here today, as well as some that we have waiting for you. So don't worry about if you didn't get the name of something. We'll make sure you get it after the webinar. But when it comes to tools, courses, books, processes, a lot of people are attending today because they're just learning about story structure, or just kind of they're interested in it. They know a little bit, but they want to learn more. Are there any specific, whether it's an app, a book, an article you read somewhere, a website, is there any specific resources along those lines that you would recommend to our participants today?
Sure. I'm probably going to repeat myself, but I would recommend checking out the Contour app.
Yeah.
And digging into that. The questions that they ask about character, about where your character is at in their journey. They've done a really interesting job of combining several different structures, but in a way that's not overwhelming. So check that one out. I think Blake Snyder's book is pretty good, Save the Cat. I recommend that. There are some genre books, whether you're working in rom-com or horror or action, some of those have kind of some specific formats, and that's okay. So that would be a thing to seek out. Different specific books related to those specific films. They all include some element of structure.
Yeah.
I've got a couple links I can share that I think outline the overarching, the general structure things, and you can kind of dig in more. I don't like to say you must read this, you must read this, you must read this. Seek it out. Seek it out. I'll share some links with you guys, but I think if you Google 3-act structure, Hollywood 8-point structure, you're going to find a lot of things. And my goal, like I said in the initial thing, is for you to find what resonates with you. You're going to find all the resources that Dara and the Celtx team share afterwards. Click on what resonates with you first, and then just go down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Thanks. I think I'm going to hand it over to Nicole now because we do have a fair number of questions coming in. And for our participants, I'm going to hand things off to Nicole, and Nicole's going to ask those questions of Gillian, just so we can all both keep our voices. Gillian's going to be hoarse at the end of this, unfortunately. But if you want to go ahead, Nicole, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself so you can take over there. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dara. Thank you, Gillian. That was incredible. Everyone is learning lots and enjoying it tons. So before we start the Q&A session, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time. I think that we're going to help a lot of beginners and professional writers alike, because I think it's super important to get back to basics, even if you are a really accomplished and really well-written person. So thank you so much for facilitating this conversation.
My pleasure.
So just to get started with questions, I am going to start asking them in chronological order, just to be fair. So we'll start with a couple of questions that were actually submitted before the webinar today. So the first is from Nike in South Africa. They ask, how do you create a good story that is not derivative, especially when there's already so many good stories out there? They said that they get discouraged when they think of a good idea only to realize it's already been told.
But it hasn't been told by you. It hasn't been told by you. Was it Mikey?
Yeah.
You haven't told that version of the story. You, from your experience and how you were raised in South Africa, it hasn't been told by you. Sure, you've seen the same idea, but it's going to come out of your heart and your fingers differently. Not so much about structure. It's about heart here and perspective and worldview. So yeah, don't get discouraged. Your version of this story hasn't been told. Now here's the practical side of it. I pulled up something I want to share about this. You know, we talked earlier about hero, obstacle, goal. At the base of it, every story is this. So everything is that. They're all the same. A hero, obstacle, goal. But, you know, when you get into it, goals can be different. Goals can be love. Goals can be a prize, like all the Oceans series. Goals can be personal achievement, like the movie Rudy. Goals can be survival. I got to get out of the cave. Goals can be to beat an enemy. We, mentioned Lord of the Rings before. Rescue, revenge. All of these things are, different kinds of goals. So, a lot of the movies you're going to see that have either resonated with you or do well at the box office and resonate with audiences generally have goals that we all recognize. And so what I'm trying to say is the stories have all been told, but they haven't been told by you. And your unique perspective is so valuable to the rest of us. We all want to see what your take on it is. And but practically, how can you make it not derivative? Write your heart out and then check it against your favorite structure and see where the holes are. That really is it. That really is it. Don't be afraid to write it, and don't be afraid to work it afterwards. Writing is rewriting. Writing isn't just that one script and I've got it, here it is, it's my masterpiece. Writing, which one was it? I cannot remember the screenwriter, but he's an Oscar winner. And there's a movie that I saw it recently, don't remember the name of it, but it was his 47th version that went into production. 47 versions of a script. And I'm sure a lot of people are shaking their head going, oh, I've got like 50 in my file. It's no big deal. Yeah. You know, just because you're afraid at the very beginning, oh, this one's already been told, it's exactly like I thought it would be. That's great. That's great. They did it. You had a good idea. They did it. They did it too. It's a good idea. But as you work it out yourself, you might find new things. You might see things that they didn't see. So yeah, my encouragement there is just to work. Don't be afraid. Dig in and do the work.
That's great advice. I think absolutely a story can be told a million different ways from a million different people. So I agree wholeheartedly, and I hope that you find that advice useful, Mikey. Thank you for submitting your question. The next question is from Karen Hernandez. They say, I am a new co-director for a series that is focusing on a documentary this first time round. Our story will focus on 4 different individuals and their personal stories, which are unrelated to one another. The one common theme they have is that we were focusing on is the community service that they do. Their question is, how do you structure a 1-hour documentary that focuses on 4 different characters?
That's a great question. When I hear this, the first thought I have is that documentary from a long time ago, simply called Babies. And they followed 4 babies around the globe from just about after birth until they were about a year old. There were no talking heads, no interviews. It was just following these babies. Might be interesting to watch that just as an exercise to get some ideas. However, I do have some thoughts, some practical thoughts. I love that there's a common theme. What was it? They are each doing some form of community service. Okay, so my 2 thoughts are this. There's kind of an easy beginning, middle, and end there with each subject, where when did I first, recognize the need to do this community service? When did I decide to take the first step to do this community service? How did it feel when I was, starting this community service? What have I learned? Have there been any obstacles to the community service? And what has been the result of joining this community, doing this community service? So there, that sort of each person's journey, you follow those questions and see what's the impact been in the community from this community service? Have I made a difference? Have I not made a difference? Is it tragic or whatever? So, there's an easy way to weave the timeline in, of course. But what you can play with is something that comes a little more, that makes it a little more rich in terms of me as an audience member. What if I have an idea about some community service, of doing community service, and I am sitting here afraid to start? How does each of those 4 persons' journeys answer the questions that I have? What questions might I have as an audience member? So, as you think through the questions and answers and things that each of those 4 people will have to share with you as a documentarian, as a storyteller, think, how do they answer what my journey might be as an audience member? Thinking through this journey of community service. And as you flesh that out, is there a way to interweave their experiences that takes me on a journey through the process of deciding? And when we get to the end of the story, am I as an audience member going, I'm gonna make a call right now? And so you don't have to include every single subject's part of the journey. Like there's a rule that you don't want to say the same thing twice, whether it's a narrative or doc. Don't show me the same thing twice. It's an easy way to make the audience bored and make the audience feel like you think they're a little stupid. if you show them and tell them and do it multiple times. If I got it, I got it, you know? And so if you have one subject say this part of the journey or talk about their experience when they first started, you know, then the next subject talks about what it was like at the end of that first day. And then the third subject talks about when they woke up the next morning and they were either super sore or like really demoralized because it wasn't what they expected. Just interweaving those experiences so that it answers the questions that I would have as an audience member going through the experience. That's how I would approach it. Hope that helps.
That's great. I feel like that was incredibly detailed. Thank you so much, Gillian. Karen, I hope you find that useful. And if you have any follow-up questions,
you can reach out if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Or reach out in the QA and we can pick it up. The next question is from Raul. They actually submitted a couple questions, but in the spirit of time and also allowing other attendees to ask questions, I will choose one. The one that I'm going to choose is their question about ACR action, conflict, and reverse. Is it necessary to have reversal in every or most of the scenes?
You do want each scene to be performing more than one task. You absolutely do. And, but it's a goal. It's not necessarily something the scene is not failing if it doesn't do like 3 or 7 things. I think it is wise to treat each scene like its own story, the beginning, the middle, the end. But it's going to depend on your goal for the scene and how it relates to the overall slingshot of your film. I would say it's not necessary to have a reversal every single time, as long as it moves the story forward somehow. There's, you know, we talk about how there's different kinds of obstacles and different kinds. I'm just gonna see if I can find my notes on this. I think I've got it right here. That is not it. Apologies, guys. But yeah. If it moves relationships forward, if it moves the plot forward, if it moves that yes or no question answer forward, we're doing something. Ideally, if you can do all 3, we call that a very efficient script. But no, I think if you're doing one or the other or 2 of the 3, I think you're being pretty successful. I really think that has to come back to the goal of the scene. This is one of those, it depends. Sorry, guys.
Absolutely. There are a couple people in chat, actually, Gillian, I don't know if you want to give some clarification on what actually a reversal is for some of the beginner writers in attendance. So there's a couple different ways to look at reversal. And one of those is a person, your protagonist or whoever the scene is about, if you're doing a B story or C story, enters the scene with a certain expectation or perspective or situation. And through the course of the scene, that perspective or situation or place or status is going to change. And whether that changes because of a plot device or whether that changes because of relational dynamics or whether that changes because of an action they chose based on what previously happened in the previous scene, the idea is that flips. And oftentimes that can help us with a big yes or a big no as we're moving through the story. But that's the idea of reversal. A lot of times you see it in theater. This is a big thing because, of course, theater is a lot about dialogue where it really is the power structure between 2 characters. And you walk in where one person is in the position of power and the other person is not. And through the course of the scene, those power
positions are reversed. And that's a great way to move the relational part of the story forward. So writing, to practice that, I would just try writing a couple scenes, couple sketches, just to kind of get the idea down. Just like come up with a couple of just random characters. Doesn't have to be for your script, but just a little bit of improv as a writer, and think of I don't know, look out your window and see who you see. I right now I see a guy blowing leaves, and so it's like, okay, guy blowing leaves. He's gonna go to a coffee shop and he's going to encounter someone that he perceives in a position of power over him, and just off the cuff, and I'm going to write a scene where they have a conversation at their cars and the power structure shifts. And so just gonna improv that, and just as practice. So yeah, hope that helps.
That's excellent. Also a really good exercise in just practicing writing, not just for reversals, but in general. I think that's a really, really good practice method. Thank you so much, Gillian. And I hope that helps answer your question, Rule. It was a really good question. I think a lot of information was shared because you asked that question, so thank you. So the next question is from Gore. They ask, when we're talking about dystopian science fiction with a flat character protagonist whose conflict is with the society she or he lives in, what role does story structure play in this type of story? How does it have to influence the protagonist or other characters or plot? And is it any different for short films or for feature films?
Person who wrote this question, I don't think needs the answer. It's a really well-structured question. I'm just saying. Yeah, how does it fit? That's a pretty typical fish out of water story. Because, you're already there. It's not like you were placed there, that protagonist, but you can feel like a fish out of water in the place you were born. So I would look that up. I would look up other stories that have been fish out of water and see, what those structures are. I think one thing that's really good for people to do, and I have done this myself with projects, is I've found scripts, whether it's a pilot or a feature, that I felt that resonance, at the climax. And I have literally gone through the script and gone, okay, sometimes I go through it scene by scene and write what the scene is about. Sometimes I go through it beat by beat, and several scenes can be one beat, one story beat. It takes, like the exterior of the coffee shop, you go interior to the coffee shop, and then you go down to the basement. And those are 3 scenes, but it's all one story beat. So sometimes I'll write the story beat. So I would suggest finding some dystopian future scripts, reading them, and then going through it a second time and making notes and go, okay, what is this beat? What is this next beat? What is this next beat? What is the screenwriter doing? And how is the screenwriter bringing me through this journey? And you'll begin to see, as you do that, the ideas you've had in your head for this protagonist in a dystopian future who does not want to be where they are, or does not like the world they're in. You're going to start to see, oh, I already have that. Okay, I already have that. Okay, I already have that. And so you'll see where the gaps are, and you can fill that in. Why is it necessary? Well, you've got your hero, you've got their goal. Well, I feel like at this point so far, the goal is a little undefined for me. I would want to know more. Is it to tear society down? Is it to leave? Is it to renew society and be a savior and open everybody's eyes? That would be good to clarify that and define that. And then, oh, thank you. Renew society and be a savior. I see that as it popped up. That's the best one, I think. But yeah, I think you're going to have to, what I suggest to you is just list what are all the steps that person's going to have to take? What are all the activities you think a person who's going to have to do that will have to do? And then also, as you do that, think about why you like this idea and what are the fun things you'd want to see. And so then you take your list of things you think have to happen practically. You take your list of things you'd like to see that are cool, and you go, okay, where can I put these together? And, you know, some of the things that have to happen practically really don't pull us along emotionally. So you might want to drop those out, but you know, how you just as you, this goes back to what I said how long ago, that sometimes I write out my beats, sometimes I write out my characters, sometimes I just let the pages go and I shape it up afterwards. So this would be one of those where let's look at the beats. Let's look at the beats, let's look at the cool scenes, let's see how we can put them together, and then let's see what is, you know, what we can pull out of the practical, of the, okay, well, they'll have to go to the paperwork office and fill out a bunch of papers. That's boring. We don't want to see that. Let's just know that they did it. You know, it doesn't, if it's not an emotional thing, but yeah, I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank you. Actually, the comment that you saw pop up was actually the person who asked the question. So that's a nice little connection there.
I'm not
I really
always
like that,
chat, but I did see that one.
So we only have 7 minutes left of the webinar. We got so many questions. We're almost at like 80 questions asked by all of our attendees. Incredible response. Thank you all so much for your interest, your passion, asking all these questions. I really wish we could answer them all, but we have time for one quick question. There is a question from Lily. They ask, what is the best thing to do when you know exactly how you want your story to begin and end, and you know what the overall plot is, but you're just not sure what to do with everything in between? This, I feel like, could be a really long answer or a really short answer. But Gillian, I'll leave it to you.
Well, as I said at the very beginning, I love talking structure, and you're going to have to cut me off. Lily, you know how the fact that you know how you want it to end is gold. A lot of people know how they want their story to start, but they have no clue how it ends. And yeah, I think that's a huge advantage you've given yourself, knowing how you want your story to end. I think the next question you need to ask yourself is, why does this story matter? What is the takeaway for the audience? What's the takeaway for you? And then, I mean, this is just very specific advice for you. Then look at similar stories, similar scripts, similar features, movies you've watched that have given you a similar feeling, that have had a similar climax and resolution, that make you feel that same way, and look at how they've been, look at their structure. So then do that thing that I talked about, go through the screenplay if you can find it. A lot of great websites have screenplays that you can download and read. But that would be my first thing, is like, think about, why does it matter? Then you kind of know, and if you look at other stories, you know what you need your character to go through in that crisis and climax moment, in that dark night of the soul, in that, you know, final, when they decide to, there's a death, you know, some of them talk about death, and the character has to have a moment of something dies, something is given up, some sort of sacrifice. So what have you seen where characters have that give you that same kind of emotional response? And how can you take your character through something that's not the same? No, but you'll see the similarities. You'll see what can I set up to have fall down? What can I bring them into where they have to make the choice I need them to make? And you know, that first idea is probably going to be a pretty good idea, but you can come up with another idea and a third idea and a fourth idea, and maybe the seventh idea is the one you use. You know, as you go through this structure process and thinking through these things, you guys don't have to always go with the first thing that comes up, although maybe that's the one you live with. But think of 5 ideas for that moment. Think of 5 things that just this like structure of, I have to bring them to the edge of a bridge, which please don't do that, because that's already been done so many times. But you know, that idea. So come up with what that idea is for your character. Now, that's a very specific one for you know how you want it to start and you know how you want it to end, but what do you do in the middle? That's where we go back to the thing I just mentioned with the dystopian future, is think of all the things you'd like to see this person do. What is the promise of the premise that got you excited about this idea? What are things you would like them to experience in their journey? And it doesn't have to be in the right order yet. Just list it. And then you could be like, oh, well, that makes sense. That would come before that. Yeah, and then once you get that list, think through other characters. How do they come in? How does this character's choice affect your protagonist's choice? How does this optical make your character go around? Just think of through all of those activities that you need your character to experience. And again, like I said, they don't have to be in the same order. But then once you have them, start to go, okay, mesh them, massage them, put them in, and then you'll see, okay, this is leaning towards this structure. This is leaning towards this structure. Now, where am I missing things? Where are things a little too loosey-goosey and I've got to kind of tighten it up? One of the things that structure is about is knowing when exactly to start the scene, when exactly to start the story. So if I've started some of my story beats a little too early and it's kind of just boring until I get to the point where it matters that we enter the scene, that sort of stuff. So that's what I would suggest to you. Just list all that out. And then when you put it up against the structure that you decide is the one that either this story works with or the one that resonates with you, see where those gaps are. I was going to suggest one other thing, and I think it's left my head now, but listen, seriously, guys, I know there's a lot of questions. If you want to reach out, I'm on Twitter. Is this okay?
Yeah, if it's okay with you, of course.
I love answering questions. So I'm on Twitter at Fritzbeetle, FRITCHBEETLE. It'll be in the notes. Someone can put it in the chat and you guys can reach out to me and I'll answer some questions.
That's so generous and nice. And I love everything about this. You're building a community and offering support. And I love that. I also see participants in the chat messaging each other with resources.
That's awesome, guys. I did see something pop up. I am also on Instagram at the very same handle.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to share that with you all. I'm just going to go on Twitter and actually grab it and put it in the chat. Dara, I don't know if you had any final notes, but I think that is all the time we have for QA. Thank you all so much for all of your thoughtful questions. Thank you, Gillian, so much for all of your expertise and knowledge and being so willing to share it with us. Thank you.
I'm delighted. Thank you for being excited about story structure.
Oh, we have a lot of people excited about story structure, Gillian. And for those of you attending, I have to point out, Gillian is doing this in the midst of a house move. So she has, very graciously given us her time to go through this. And we did have 80 plus questions. So we're probably not going to forward all of those to Gillian for follow-up. We will pick a few to actually get some responses to after the webinar, and we'll include that in our resource page that we send out. Some of them we're going to be able to answer for you. We also have our own writers in residence here who can help with some of these. So we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. And make sure that when we send out that recording, it's going to come on a web page that has all of these questions asked and answered in there. Nicole has just put Gillian's social handle there in the chat, but we'll also make sure that you all get that as well. We probably won't put it on our web page, Gillian, but we'll put it in an email to the, the people who are participating. And I just want to thank everyone. This has been such a great webinar. I feel like we could have done 2 hours, even 3, honestly, but we won't take that much of Gillian's time. So we do have to clue up now. As I said, there will be a recording and resources sent out to everyone. That will be about next week. So hopefully early next week, but it could be a full week. It might not be till Wednesday. It depends upon our in-house video editor and how busy he is, because we like to tighten up this webinar a little when we send it out. And I encourage you all to take a look at some of the resources that Gillian has mentioned today. And like she said, just go and explore, watch some things, notice their structure, read some things on story structure. If you follow her on Twitter, I'm sure you'll see lots recommended. If you have any further follow-up questions, you can always reach out to us at support@celtx.com and we can help you out there. And we really just want to say thanks to Gillian. This has been great. Your breadth of knowledge has been just so wonderful, and your willingness to share all of that information has been amazing. And thank you to all of our participants. We couldn't have done this without you. Your questions have been just really insightful. I see you there in the chat helping each other out. I'm getting a little teary-eyed just thinking about it. The sense of community is just wonderful. So I really want to thank everyone for that. And on that note, we're 3 minutes over, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. But thank you so much, everyone. And big thanks, Gillian.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.